So you're the director, you're a director at BlackPoint Capital, which is an investment firm weighing $90 million, dollars.
Yes, close to 10 now. But
Close to 10, okay, so let's say 10. And you're very active in the MedTech space. Mr. Perez, Francisco, Javier, tell us, what are you doing here?
Well, we see, a lot of opportunity here. I mean, we've been, working on this for a long time. It's interesting, we, here with, Guillaume, who I've known for many, many years, and Mathieu, who I've known for many, many years, we've been kind of kicking around the opportunity set, at least finance work for it, in Europe, and, certainly, the market dynamics have changed over the years to make it more and more interesting. You mentioned the dynamic of, European companies wanting to go to the US. Obviously, there's been a huge trend there. So all these companies were always looking for, investment dollars from the US, connections, the distributor, question that you mentioned earlier. And, what we saw was tremendous talent, great innovation, fantastic research facilities, but capital issues, investment issues, commercialization issues, and we thought, is there something that we can do about this? And we continue to see a huge opportunity. I think we're going to talk about some of the positive things today, but also some of the negative things today. But I think all of those things in totality continue to create a big opportunity. And from an investment perspective, you can do a lot here with less capital.
You can do a lot here with less capital.
Correct.
Innovation, creating a startup, having it developed in the US, is quite expensive.
Yeah. So from an investor perspective, you're looking at the amount of money that it takes to develop a product in the US versus what it takes here. And I think we have huge opportunities for engineering, for research and development here, for manufacturing here. And but the sales and marketing opportunity remains in the US. It's a larger market, pricing, reimbursement. So I think that those two together create something pretty exciting. Now, unlocking that is tough. We all know that's tough. We're going to talk about it being tough.
You told me you're blown away how much a company is able to do in Europe with their money. Their evaluations are more attractive.
100%. Because at the end of the day, from the investment perspective, the ROI depends on math. It's really just math. When more money goes into companies, when the valuations get high, you kind of have to run through scenarios. Okay, well, what is it going to actually take for this company to actually return? Most VC firms will look for companies that can return the entire fund. What is it actually going to take when the valuations get that high? It starts to border on possible. So, you have to look for those opportunities.
The companies are too expensive in the US, is that what you're telling us?
There's definitely a lot of that. You saw a lot of that in the digital health space. A ton of money went into the digital health space. A lot of these projects were being funded with, really at the end of the day, too much money.
Too much money.
Too much money.
Compared to what their return on investment can be.
Exactly. And there's a lot of trend following, there's a lot of those dynamics, but if you fund companies with too much money, we see what typically happens. It's almost a red flag in my opinion.
A what?
It's almost a red flag in my opinion.
A red flag, okay, sure. So, how long has BlackPoint Capital, for how long did the company exist?
So, we're affiliated with Sky Investment Advisors, which has been around for 30 years.
30 years.
We've been, initially we were a funds of funds, so we've been allocating to funds for many, many years. And now we have business lines in a whole bunch of different things.
And are you accustomed to coming to Europe and trying to find companies here to fund them?
No, but we're putting in the work to do it.
You haven't done that yet.
No, but
okay. You're in Europe to do that for the first time.
That's why I'm here.
Okay. So you just told us. Okay, we've been thinking doing that for quite a long time, but does the changes, the political changes that happen in the US, help you, do it now?
You know, the do it now question is actually...
Oh, I can see a little smile on your face.
Well, the do it now question is super intriguing because last year it was do it now because, MDR is tough and commercializing in Europe is tough and, America is a bigger market. And now, with all the geopolitical changes, do it now makes sense again, and perhaps even more. The research dollars are potentially drying up, not potentially, they're drying up in the US. There's concerns about the NIH, there's concerns about the FDA. All of a sudden, you look at all these great research institutions in Europe, you look at governments in Europe that are largely supportive of innovation, and all of a sudden you start thinking, okay, well, if we're following a business model where we think that Europe can be a hub for research, can be a hub for the development of these technologies because of the great talent that's around, but you can then take advantage of the commercial market in the US. Okay, well, all of a sudden it starts to become, okay, well, maybe that's even a better story now with with all the weirdness that's going on, which is obviously, I'm sure we'll touch on as well.
So what was true a few years ago is even truer. I think that's proper English. It's even truer now. It makes even more sense. So let's move on to Suzanne Halliday. So Suzanne, you work at BSI, and BSI is a notified organism, and your job is to make sure that a medical device is compliant with the European regulations. Tell us about MDR. MDR, the acronym is like, in French, it's the acronym for mort de rire, which means LOL, like laughing out loud, okay? MDR, well, mort de rire, well, laughing out loud. So that's where the next take up.
I thought you might use another French word.
Oh, no, certainly. I see what you mean. No, certainly not.
Yeah.
So tell us about MDR. Why was it created and implemented?
Okay,
The
so
medical device regulation.
Yeah, medical devices regulation and the IVDR were created in responses to some scandals that happened in Europe. You probably are familiar with the PIP breast implant scandal, some metal-on-metal implant replacements, some gynecological meshes that were used for indications inappropriately, and so the European regulations took a big step up.
There was a confidence problem in the whole system in the end.
There was,
Okay.
and the lack of confidence in the regulations and the notified bodies meant that the European politicians asked for the regulation to be tougher, for the notified bodies to re-qualify all of their staff, redo all of their procedures, and re-review every single device on the market in Europe.
That was a bit too much, wasn't it?
It was a bit too much.
Okay.
There was one fraudulent manufacturer who went to jail for fraud. No regulatory system can catch fraud, elaborate fraud. So maybe the pendulum swung too far towards conservative and no risks, and the pendulum is swinging back in Europe. So the Commission at DG Santé is in a process of doing something called targeted evaluation, and there are open opportunities for you to comment on the European regulatory environment. That's open until tomorrow. Yeah, I know, very fast. But it has been open since December, and things are changing. I think the other thing to say is that the notified bodies now have 8 years of experience with the MDR. So BSI ourselves, we have now issued 2,000 MDR certificates and 500 IVDR certificates. So
that's 2,000 on the whole, and 500 in the field of AI?
IVD.
Oh, IVD, okay, sorry.
In the field of AI, 38.
38, okay, it's the beginning.
It's the beginning.
But it still exists.
So I think, the very first time you do something, you're very slow and uncertain, but we are no longer slow and uncertain. I think things are improving.
We are no longer slow and uncertain. Meaning that now BSI shows that you're ready to, everything's functioning well. For instance, how long does it take to get a CE mark?
We are definitely under 12 months now on almost everything. It does depend on the quality of the submissions that get to us. I think the other thing that's softened a little bit in Europe is when the regulations first came out, they were very tough. Do not consult, you're a regulator, behave like a regulator. And so we became unfriendly, but that again is softening. Just last week there were things published that say we are allowed to enter into something called structured dialogue. If you need to talk to someone up front to ensure some predictability, we are the people that make the decision at the end about whether something goes to market. So you probably want to talk to us up front about equivalence, sample sizes in clinical trials, what is your classification. Did you see in the last session that fascinating little robot that might deliver drugs? All right, we're going to have to work with the European Medicines Agency, but we've already done it for another drug-device combination that needs to allow drugs across the blood-brain barrier. So again, I think things are improving.
Things are improving. So now we need 12 months to get a CE mark. How does that compare with the equivalent mark delivered by the FDA?
Okay, so I do think that our timelines are dropping. Our lead times are transparent. They're published on our websites. They're released once a month. Most of the teams have less than a 1 month lead time to start the review of a file. It's 2 or 3 months to start your quality management system assessments. There is one team that has a slightly longer lead time, and that's in vitro diagnostics, just because they are still in that phase of picking up everything that they have to do, which is 80% more than they ever did in the past for Europe. But so your question was, how are we trying to improve that time? As I said, we're allowed to work in an interactive way, and that is starting to further decrease the timelines. If you compare it to a PMA for the US FDA, I think their timelines can also be 12, 18 months. It's not comparable to compare Europe to a 510K for every product.
Okay, so things are really changing, things are moving. So tell us about AI. You've already validated some AI systems.
So yeah, I'm here speaking like I'm a medical devices and IVD notified body, but Europe's legislation was published last year for AI. It is a horizontal legislation. So that means it will impact on all the other vertical legislation for cars and aviation and personal protective equipment and so on. So it's going to cross-cut across all the other European pieces of legislation. We are already issuing certificates to ISO 42001, which is the quality management system standard for artificial intelligence. We have submitted our application to be an AI notified body, but that is only for biometrics. Medical devices have to meet the AI regulation in 2027. So we are working with DG Sante to extend our scope as a medical and IVD notified body to do AI. That's the way all the other notified bodies will have to behave as well. So it stays vertical, and then you get accepted to be allowed to review AI on top of what you already do.
So let's move to Guillaume Viallaneix. You're the founder and president of MedTech Momentum, which is a marketing agency in the US with 20 employees and has been dedicated to medical technology for 10 years now. You're both French and American, but you live in the US. And you're a good friend of Javier. So tell us about, from your point of view, how are things going on in the US? How interesting is the market for a European company, that type of thing?
Yeah, so I do have a marketing agency, but before that, for 20 years, I'm too far? Okay. Before that, for 20 years, I was on the OEM side, driving spine companies like co-founded the US subsidiary of Salons in the US. Created another spine company 6 years later, which called Eden Spine, that we grew and sold. So for 20 years, I was one of you guys. I was developing products. I was developing products. I was getting them approved by the FDA. I was getting CE marks. I was going in Brazil and everywhere around the world, trying to get the products approved, finding distributors around the world, and then sell the company. So I was able to do that twice. And then I decided 10 years ago I was going to create an agency that specialized in medical devices. So just went to see a few friends and said, do you think it's a good idea? Does the market needs this? And I was told, yes, so actually you should try this. And I thought it would be just side jobs and fun. And 10 years later we have 150 companies. We have 20 employees, and it's much more than I thought it would be. So really
you're living the American dream.
I don't know. Especially now, I don't know about the American dream.
You're not so sure now. Okay.
So yeah, it is a very, very weird environment here. I wasn't sure about this conference, what to say really, when I was told, I spent 30 years of my life in France, 30 years in the US, I have 2 passports, and I love the US for all these years. I see what's going on here, not very proud of it. I must apologize for our president and a few other people that you guys are looking at every day. It's very stressful. But at the same time, Javier, my good friend here, is telling me, forget about it, don't look at the news, the markets are moving, things are happening, there are opportunities right and left. And it's true that in terms of MedTech momentum, I've never received so many phone calls from companies, European companies looking to come to the US, and that actually are trying to figure it out because they see an opportunity. And
I've never had so many phone calls from European companies wanting to come to the US.
Why?
I just wanted you to make sure I understood you well.
Oh yeah. No, it
so
is.
why? Now is the answer to the question why.
Well, it's a bit of a mystery.
Okay.
Because on one hand, you hear people, Americans, saying, "I'm living in the US and I'm going to live in America. I mean, in Europe or in Italy or in France, and the movie stars and everything." But if you look, the stock markets are not doing well, but the finance community and the investors are investing, and there is activity, and there is new technologies, and there is AI, and there is a lot of great things happening. So I think it's
a strange moment.
It's a very strange moment, and it's I'm from Normandy. I grew up in Normandy, in Caen. You guys can
bien.
Well, and I always remember growing up in Caen, seeing all the people who succeeded the most are the ones who understood how to rebuild Normandy after D-Day. It almost feels like that, like the whole US market is being destroyed. I mean, Musk is a good example of that. But if you destroy it, you have to rebuild it. And if you
yes, I think that's a good idea. Let's destroy, and then it will have a piece of land of rubble and rebuild.
And if you rebuild in a market with 360 million people, with a regulatory environment that is very good for companies, or a lot easier than MDRs.
If you're good for companies, are you good for people?
The what? The changes?
If a system is good for companies, is the system good for people?
I think it's good because there is a lot of innovation right now.
Yeah.
So innovations means better patient care at the end of the day. So I didn't feel bad.
For those who can afford
to
pay for the health.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
You have 25 million people who are struggling with that
In the US.
in the US, but there is a lot of people who can. So, you know, it is an interesting forum here because we are all probably wondering, you know, actually I wrote an article and I called it "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" You know, if you like music, you know what I'm talking about. And a few weeks ago I was more like, you know, about the going side, and now I'm more about the staying side. I do think there is a real opportunity. Now we need to control this crazy guy that is, you know, the head of our country. It makes no sense. Going after Canada doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And then we can talk about tariffs. I don't know if you have questions about this.
About tariffs, yes, maybe, yeah. I'm sure there will be questions from the audience. Yeah, let's talk with Manish Patel. Manish, you're the CEO of Jiva. So, Jiva.ai, and which is a British company. Can you tell us what Jiva is doing? What your innovation is about?
Sure, yeah, yet another AI company. Everyone's sick of hearing about AI companies. So we're an AI no-code platform. So what we do is we help other companies, whether they're MedTech companies or otherwise, build their AI solutions without requiring to write any code to build them. So we put those elements together, they describe what they want in natural language, and we use our own internal system of AIs to put together the data science and AI solutions for the user. So often our clients are clinicians who are great at what they do, you know, whether they're a prostate cancer specialist or a heart specialist or whatever it might be. They understand their data, they understand their patients, but they don't understand AI and how it works, they don't understand data science. So we make that part of the equation easier for them to build that particular solution.
So what can they find on your platform?
So it's a very broad application. We have everything. So for example, the United Nations uses our platform to create recommender engines for clinicians to recommend text for learning, for knowledge, all the way through to CROs using us to do lead generation, marketing, and advertising. So we're a very broad application. Anywhere where you want to do some kind of predictive analysis, anywhere where you want to do some kind of automation, that is where we can excel. And we step away from regulations a little bit. We comply to all the data regulation parts of it, but because the IP and the data always belong to our client, they're always responsible for the regulatory side of the applications that we build.
So you can find their diagnostics tools, imaging tools, screening tools.
Right. Yeah. So we actually started as a prostate cancer imaging company. That's where we actually began. And I've got 25 years of experience in AI and machine learning. Started off in genetics and worked in other areas as well. But prostate cancer diagnostics was an interesting one because of the situation in the UK when 1 in 4 black men get prostate cancer by the age of 55, 60, 1 in 8 for Caucasians. And so it's a real problem to diagnose it early. What stopped us actually from doing it properly and getting all the way through to market was actually the regulation was just too hard. And we did the CE marking and the FDA side simultaneously. The FDA were way easier in terms of just communicating and what you were talking about, structured conversations. That's what was missing at the time, back in 2020 or so. That's what was missing.
That was a bad moment. 2020, remember well, that was a bad moment.
For a lot of reasons,
yeah.
It wasn't a good time. But we realized at that time, actually, the application that we've built is far more broad. And we don't have to do regulatory stuff to create specific solutions. We can have our clients own those things and run those things on our platform. So that's what we do.
So you're in the UK, your company is based in the UK, so in the US, not in the European Unions, and you decided to create it in the UK and stay there. What are the advantages, disadvantages of doing that?
Yeah, so I'm not going to mention the B word. It was mostly bad. So we started off in 2019, right? And that was obviously post-Brexit. we had a choice, either we Delaware B Corp in the US and go with the US investors in the UK. And we decided to stay in the UK for a number of reasons, and one of the main ones actually was we needed a really good technology base. And actually the talent in Europe and the talent in the UK is excellent for data science and AI engineering. It's also excellent in the US, but it's extremely expensive. Right? So I know, I won't tell him, but my lead data scientist, I know he'd get 500-600K salary if he moved to Silicon Valley. He would never. But you know, it's worlds apart in terms of cost of building those kind of teams. So one of the main reasons was talent to stay in the UK, but also we were all there. We were building a team, the planners were there. Our main investor was there, so we decided to stay in the UK. We've won a couple of grants in Europe as well. I was just in Germany last week. And you know, we're part of that whole EU-UK ecosystem, and we're trying to bring everything back together again after Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall.
And how did you convince your investors to invest in your company? How much did you get from them?
Yeah, so we've raised almost £3 million since inception. We're going through our Series A right now. Investment environment in the UK has been incredibly difficult, I would say. We have targeted US investors actually for this larger round, mostly because, well, two reasons. The risk appetite from US investors is different. Right? They have a much more broad understanding of, you know, a startup failing is a fact of life, and therefore is taking a punt when you're putting a couple of £1 million into a couple of $1 million into a company. And secondly, the startup culture is slightly different in the US as opposed to the EU and the UK, in that it's a lot more permissive for change, it's a lot more permissive for things taking time to develop to revenue. Although there's two sides to that coin, there's a whole tranche of companies that are out there that have got a lot of money and just spending it and not really getting to revenue. But yeah, it's two sides of the same coin, I think. So yeah, we're targeting US investors as well. But I've got to say, UK and EU has been, for the last couple of years, been very difficult to raise. But that is changing, it's softening up.
Okay, softening up. Let's talk to Dr. Zarychta now. Thanks very much for being here with us. And we are going to go back to Europe, to the European Union, because you're an expert advisor for the European Commission, and more specifically for the European Innovation Council, the EIC, which funds high-tech companies. It's Europe's biggest deep tech investor, I was told. So what's your take on the whole debate and various questions that were asked?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation, especially to MD 101 AXEME. I really appreciate that. And I'm very happy that I actually speak the last, so I have the last word. Because I believe that with all different things which my co-founders shared, what is very important, I believe, is that there is so much potential in Europe. There are so much things which we can put forward, and we have to be proud of that. We have to find the ways to decide it further. And so when you were speaking, Manish, about how the company is growing here, there is a lot of opportunities, certainly, but we have certain limitations. So now one of the limitations is, for example, regulatory. But that's also the question of protecting European citizens from certain technologies not being used in the right way. But there are some certain things which I would say also have differences when thinking about US or other places around the world when it comes to risk appetite. And again, I agree to what Mathieu said. Okay, we have a different culture of startups in Europe. So there is a little bit of the question of how that being risk averse, but there is another thing which was sometimes showing is that everybody knows that for companies which are started, 98% of them will fail. Actually now it's in 95%. I will go even farther than that. And especially in the first 2-3 years, 10% of companies really fail, like very horrible way.
Flat.
Yeah, it's like, as you say, it's like a flat line. But the thing is that I believe there's a lot of different questions which we need to ask ourselves as a startup founder or as someone who is working for an institution like AXEME or another one, which is bringing so many innovative ideas of how to mitigate that. And I believe that one of the things which we have in Europe, which US doesn't really have that much of law, is actually, to be a voice of EIC or European Commission, is that we have this soft landing with so many different grant opportunities and bridging of technology transfer, which happens. Having a talent, having extremely well-educated people who are also risk-driven, who want to bring also the technology forward, who are connected to really answer to unmet need. I believe that this is really something which we are able to bridge. And another thing which I believe also happens is that, US is going through some tumultuous times, I would say, but we have learned our lesson in Europe, so we are not asleep anymore. I believe that there is a lot of, kind of tendencies to wake up, to really move ahead, and find approaches.
In what way?
So what I would say is that what was really happening in the past, and sorry, because you're the only startup founder, in the panel, is that okay, we start a company, we take it easy. I'm a founder, I'm a CEO. Give me some money. I will work on my idea for the 10 years, and okay, it will fail. Well, never mind. I was doing my best. I wanted to go for a conference, first, pages of magazines on TV, and then the company's burning rate is like, woo, scarlet. It doesn't really matter because I'm doing something for humanity, okay? But
That happens.
all the time.
All the time. Astonishing point.
If I would like to ask people, please raise your hand if you have heard a case like this. Please raise your hand. Honestly.
Oh, we have a few hands.
Yes, and I believe that if everybody would think willing to go a little bit farther in the topic, everybody knows a company like that. And I say about really honest reasons for failure, right? So what I believe which is really happening, which we need to appreciate, is that we have talent, we have people, we have all different kind of ways to bring synergies. And actually, what we have learned in Europe is to network better. Organizing events like that, we have an opportunity to take a seat and represent different points of view, what we do. I believe that this is amazing.
Fantastic, thanks very much. Ms. Zarychta, are there any questions in the audience? We've been talking about many different topics, but mainly geopolitical, and there's so much going on in the US at the moment. We can talk about tariffs. I think it's Mr. Viallaneix who suggested that. Sure.
I have just a quick question. Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. I have a question about the structured dialogue. I was wondering if this is just a BSI offer, or is this something that's being designed by EU to make it easier to reach NGR? And if that is the case, how does it work?
Yeah, so great question. It's not just a
Could you redefine it again, please?
So when MedTech Europe first asked for structured dialogue, it ranged from everything. What are your lead times? What are your costs? Do you have competence to do my product? So there's some really basic questions. And of course we're allowed to have those types of discussions. And then they range into, do you think we've done enough testing? Have we frozen our design? Is our verification and validation good enough? And then it goes all the way to, is our clinical trial, or do we have to do a trial? Can we be equivalent to one of our competitor products? And so MedTech Europe described that type of discussion, all the way from the very administrative, what is my classification, am I a device, to how big a clinical trial do I need to do, they want it to be called structured dialogue. We are allowed to do it. All the notified bodies are allowed to do
Is that
it.
like a pre-sub meeting?
Is it like a
Is it like a pre-sub meeting,
Pre-sub
which
meeting.
is a US FDA terminology. So you have to have entered into a contract with the notified body. Europe is trying to stop shopping around. There's 50 different notified bodies, so they want you to have picked one, and then then you're allowed to start those types of discussions. No notified body is ever allowed to consult and tell you exactly how to meet the requirements, but we are allowed to talk to you about what the requirements are, and then we'll evaluate your proposals for how you meet them and whether it's enough. That's not consultancy. Is that okay? We're all allowed to do it.
So BSI is not the biggest notified body. You're 6,000 or 9,000 on the whole?
So I think we are the biggest medical devices.
Okay, that's what I wanted
body.
to
You're right.
tell.
We're a very-
On the whole, you're not the biggest one. Some have 50,000, 60,000 people on board, and you are 6,000, but you have, but in the field of medical device, you're very well armed.
That's fair, but we're much smaller than SGS and UL, and we
Yeah.
have 50, 60.
But maybe bigger in the
Bigger
medical
devices.
device
Yeah.
field.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for me? Not really? Sure.
Given that we're talking about global dynamics, we mentioned European Union, we mentioned the US, so what about China? And I think in the space, healthcare space, we used to think that the Chinese didn't have what it took to compete in our markets. I think at least in biotech, it's changing very, very quickly. I'd love to hear your opinion on what about MedTech?
Is that for me?
It's for everybody, yes.
Everybody.
So I am aware that the EU thinks that there are some unfair practices, that some medtech manufacturers in China are given preferential treatment, and so there is some discussion about retaliating. I'm also aware that China has done very well with early regulation of AI, and they're doing it in a very agile way. They're doing it with a set of standards. Because the technology is moving so quickly, it's hard to write it into a regulation and keep on top of how fast the most innovative producers of AI are actually going. So I think they're doing very well for AI. I am aware of some unfair practices, but I'll leave it there.
If I can bridge to this, so actually, I believe that we still, in certain ways, continue to underestimate China. Really. It's since a long time, especially, for example, in the space of AI, it's KaTFenix who brought a lot of kind of tournaments, getting upside down. When it comes to, artificial intelligence. China is not the country which copies anymore, at all. We had this kind of way of saying things. After spending some time in Singapore and having a lot of counterparts from Chinese companies, I believe that this is definitely still a country completely on the rise. And what is changed is that where we have a very kind of limited, very traditional structure, we kind of hide behind this, where China is extremely agile and is kind of able to adjust along the way. So they create new structures. Another thing, and sorry, this is not about China, it's about Middle East. I have spent a couple of latest weeks in Dubai. And so observing also what is happening there, or what's happening in Qatar, or in other countries in GCC region. We cannot compare in Europe, where, this is the first countries where we have AI ministers, where we have, a ministry for the family. So I believe that if we really want to go ahead within the European landscape, we have to be more agile. We have to be, kind of more open to break the things, so to go also in a certain way horizontal, to bring the topics together, which maybe naturally we're not connecting with each other. And so I believe that multi-stakeholder engagement on different ways, governments, bringing the policy, bringing regulatory, bringing startups, and to create, this kind of landscape. This is where we can really compete, not only with US, but with everyone.
Yeah, and from an investment perspective, I would say that, China has had a rough 3 years, but, from the investment community, we're definitely hearing a lot of folks spending time in China again. A lot of people looking at China again in the biotech space. A lot of people looking for assets over there, basically putting boots in the ground, getting people over there relatively quickly. You know, for mobilization, we're seeing hedge funds, you know, really investing heavily in China again. I do think that, you know, it is wrong of all of us to underestimate China. I do think that China will have issues. They can't continue just building infrastructure forever and housing forever, and you know, they will have economic issues, but you know, it's from a technology perspective, they're going to be a force.
I have another question for you, Javier. What does it take when you come to Europe and look at companies? What are your requirements? What's a company you want to invest in, and what will you ask them to do? For instance, will they have to settle in the US? Will they have to create a subsidiary in the US, for instance? What's a good company to invest in?
Well, you know, what's a good company to invest in is a really tough question, right? And you know, I think it comes down to a lot of factors. I mean, you know, I think everything has to come together for that ultimate yes. You know, in a world where you basically just tell no to pretty much everybody. So I do think it, you know, has to be a problem we're solving, and it has to be the right management team, it has to be the right timing, the technology has to mature. You know, it's interesting that the title of the panel is The Future of MedTech. Yeah, I think we've been talking about the future of MedTech forever at this point. You know, I think a lot of these technologies are finally maturing. They're finally getting to a place where they're going to be commercially viable. The technology has finally caught up. So, you know, I think it's a very interesting time to think about that. So, all of those factors have to come together. You know, I don't foresee, you know, making any European company move to the US or anything like that. I do think that there are opportunities to do selective things.
What kind of things?
Well, let's say, you know, the company wants to have, you know, good connections with KOLs in the US or clinical trial sites, etc.
They would be able to sell that service,
Yeah.
for instance. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, you know, the setting up as a Delaware C Corp thing, you know, one of the, you know, things that you're solving for there is just the friction that exists when you're asking an American investor to invest in a European company, because all of a sudden the American investor is just like, oh, the technology's great, but oh man, now I got to figure out what the difference in regulations are between Germany and Poland, and the tax implications, and where's my money going, and so I do think that
This is so complex.
So I do think, yeah, and from an investment perspective, I mean, you know, we talk about the issue in Europe with a fragmented market in the medtech and the medical space. It's far worse in the investment field. I mean, you have more than 200 investment markets in Europe. It's very, very fragmented. So, you know, that becomes a huge problem. And, you know, I think most American investors are like, yeah, Europe's great. We love Europe. We always go to Europe on vacation, etc. But, you know, how do you lower that friction? It's a real problem.
Yeah.
But also what's going on right now is forcing to really reconsider how to approach the US market. What's the best strategy? Are you supposed to build a subsidiary in the US? Are you trying to build a factory? Are you outsourcing, you know, to contract manufacturers? What's your supply chain looking like? I mean, these are discussions we're having with our clients. It's not just about selling your products to America, to KO Health and hospitals. Are you ready? And there are many ways to do it. I mean, there are many ways to do it. And the good news with the US is that pricing, as you know, is so high that even with the 25% tariffs, there is still a way to have a very profitable business. You know, I always give that example for those with no spine. You know, a petticoat screw in France is sold for, I think, 120 euros to a hospital. Is sold $1,000 in the US.
The same one?
Same one.
Oh, yeah.
So the cost of that screw is $25. So even though you might have a tariff, you know, to consider, you still have a business. But how do you deal with all the, you know, all the other costs? So there is a whole new approach that needs to be implemented. But pushing on all the discussion that we have about China and everything else. I mean, as a European, because I'm French and American, and I'm always thinking about it's a great opportunity for Europe. I mean, finally.
At this moment, there's a great opportunity.
Yes, because we need to get, I cannot say, but I think our heads together, you know, because it's now and ever. If we don't get together, we don't stick together, we don't fix all our regulatory environment problems we've created for ourselves, we start reconnecting with other parts of the world that actually are dying to work with us. In Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, Africa, you name it, Canada, you know, it's ready, it's just here. We just have to get it together. And so there are many opportunities. We can do it in the US, great, even if they are not the countries we want. They were once, fine, great market, huge, biggest one in the world by far, especially in healthcare. Let's do that, but let's do that in a certain way, but let's realign everywhere and do it smart and come together.
It seems like you're advocating, I think it was Mr. Fouin was advocating for one big European health market. Okay, are there any questions in the audience? Anyone who would like, yeah, sure.
Thanks for the change. We have mentioned that there's a good news. The time for market approval in Europe is now reduced with the MDR, but about FDA, we know there are 5,000 persons who lost their job in FDA. Do you know the impact do you have an idea about the impact for the market approval for FDA?
I can answer. So yeah, that was one of the big jokes, you know, from Mr. Musk, crazy decisions. So basically, and then this is where I left it, and maybe it has evolved since then, but he fired thousands of people at the FDA, and a week later he had to rehire them because it didn't make any sense, and it would have hurt everybody in the process, every company, patients, everywhere. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. Is some decisions are being made that are completely irrational, and they are being reversed a week or 2 weeks later. So we don't see the impact yet of what's going on. I have clients who are like very happy because they got their 510K like 3 days before the cut was made. But we are all wondering. Now the good news is that there is one thing the Trump administration wants is business. They want businesses to do well. That's all they care about. You know, even with Ukraine, that's all they care about is business. So we have to hope that they don't want to, you know, they're not going to mess up the businesses. However, the stock market is not doing that well. So that's a discussion with Javier. So they are really playing with fire, and we don't know where that's going to go. But for to answer your question on the FDA, it was a big discussion within the industry, like I think it was a month ago, 3 weeks ago now, and it was fixed apparently. So we'll see.
So, you know, we don't know the impact yet, as you know, Guillaume said, but I do think it's smart to consider extending the timelines on those investor decks. You know, it's difficult to imagine a scenario where there isn't impact, especially, you know, there's the FDA, there's the NIH, there's the research, you know, a lot of research is being done at, you know, academic institutions. I think it's impossible to foresee no impact. So I do think that timelines will get elongated.
Last question maybe? Otherwise I'm going to ask it, Mathieu.
Yeah, just a comment on the FDA side. So like roughly 1,000 people that have been laid off within the FDA. Well, not 5,000, I think 5,000 is like total administration and so on. And most of them, the 1,000 people are dealing directly with AI. So that's definitely going to have a huge impact, I think, in delays, timelines to get approval. So it's actually a good thing for Europe. Also looking at the investments that are made in Europe in that side. The other comment was about China, and I think I agree with you, Ken, is that and giving you two examples, I think in the medical imaging space, you have a very strong company called United Imaging as pushing very, very, very strong on the international markets worldwide. And they've understood that they've got great technology approved in China, huge market in China, and now they're starting to expand outside. They've already done this in the past 10 years, but bringing Chinese people over to Europe and bringing Chinese people over to the US. Top management doesn't work. So they started now hiring a bunch of people from the GEs, the Philips, the Siemens to run the local business. And now they're starting to boom really heavily and impacting those markets. Just looking at the last RSNA in Chicago is just overwhelming. And they've got great technologies pushing on the market. And the second example was in the robotic surgery. China is progressively overcoming the US in terms of the number of patents done in robotic surgery. So there's a huge push in the robotic field. And I think in Europe we have this chance that we have so many players in the robotic area. And because I'm French, so in France, in Grenoble, there's so many companies, great companies in the robotic surgery field where we can make a huge difference. So we need to get together, like you said, Guillaume, because there are, I think, great opportunities for companies to get out of the pack and become future leaders in Europe. So.
Yeah, and one more thing also is, in the past, all over the Silicon Valley, in all the major companies, many of the researchers are French. And that maybe will change. Maybe they'll come back. And actually, we're going to grab some Americans that also want to be here. So I think that could be a nice little turnaround here that's going to be very interesting to see. So we'll see. That's why, this whole mess could be actually an opportunity for Europe. And then we still have the US anyway, it's not going anywhere, so let's take advantage of it. But yeah, it's interesting.
Mrs. Halliday?
I was going to add something about innovation and how to innovate. And one of the outputs of the MDR and IVDR is that as a huge increase in transparency. I think when medical device manufacturers used to look at what was already on the market, they would go to the US FDA databases. What's there? What clinical data? What did their IFUs say? What did their PMA say? What did their 510K? How did they get to market? So when Udemy works for Europe, which some of it starts to be
Udemy. E-U-D-E-M-E-D.
You're right. So it's the database, but it's the database for Europe that's going to handle every single certificate a notified body issues is going to be transparent. All the indications for use are going to be there. How did it get to market? Was it based on equivalence to a competitor product? Was it based on a clinical investigation? That's going to be more transparent. So you will start to see, so let me come back to innovation and the definitions and how to innovate. To me, and I'll defer to the more business-minded people, but as an engineer, it's got to be feasible technically. So the EU has incredibly prescriptive requirements now about what you have to do. So you can check on technical feasibility. It's got to be desirable. And then what are you looking for? What is the unmet need? What isn't already done? And if you can see all the competitors' products and all their intended uses for everything that's on the market, maybe it's easier to find the piece that's not been done well or that could be improved. And then, of course, it's got to be viable. And then that comes to money. But, yeah, sorry, if I was going to go for, I think Europe will be more transparent. Maybe it'll make your job easier when you're trying to say yes to something.
So why is this transparency so important in the end? Do you have the feeling that Europe is getting more transparent than the US?
Oh,
Okay,
definitely. We used to look at manufacturers' risk management, and it used to be based on probabilities of things going wrong in the MAUD database, which was a US database. Europe's going to have one. You're going to see all the European manufacturers, all the European products are going to be registered and transparent. All the vigilance is going to be. So the transparency was done so that patients could make good decisions for themselves and their families. But I think the transparency is partly good for you as well as an investor.
And huge for founders as well. I mean, we talk to founders all the time that, one of the things that they wish that they had done more of was learn from the mistakes that their competitors made in the past, because there's been a lot of attempts at a lot of the things that people are trying to commercialize now.
Yeah, Francisca, I love what you just said, because so over the past, say, 3.5 years, I did due diligence of more than 600 innovative ideas, startups, SMEs, all different kinds of companies in different stages of development. And
You've been reviewing more than 600.
yeah, I've been reviewing, so doing, like all different topics coming from the time, where is it the right time, is it the right technology, how well the technology is protected, if it's really groundbreaking, or if it's not a copy, if there is really a market for it, if there is already a business model which is well developed, and all different topics. And I believe actually, and that's what brings me to one of the topics which I believe are so important, is that the main thing is actually the founders, people. We are doing things, people for people, for others. And I believe that this is also something which is extremely important to include in our way of how we view innovation. And a lot of cases, so when you kind of bridge to that, we build structures, we build a lot of different kind of things, but eventually what is extremely, I think, important, and what we learn also in Europe, and we're more going forward in this direction, is to be really more of an entrepreneur. Because we didn't really have this thing, it's kind of more American, but it comes to us. So I believe that people have learned how to really go forward, and how to really, enable the ideas, how to bring the innovation forward, how to take all different, grant opportunities, how to go and talk to investors, how to really go and pitch, how to think that, okay, my idea is something great, and it's really worth working forward. I just want to pass the micro to Manish, because I'm working like he's the founder, and I'm an outside coach and mentor for startups. And so it's a very important thing, I believe, to also have a voice. And that's,
Yeah, I think a good point that you made there. Actually, founders in Europe, and I'm going to count the UK as Europe, whether you like it or not. So,
It is. I'm sorry about that. Of course it is.
Founders on this side of the Atlantic are a different breed, because we're a bit more conservative. We're a bit less sort of showy-offy, right? One of the things that I found funny. One of the guys that was organising an investor event was, guys, can you be a bit more American when you do your pitch?
Can you sound more American?
But can you be a bit more American? As in a bit more boisterous, a bit more, aggressive in the way that you get something, and really love what you're doing. Show your passion. Don't kind of be all British about it and say, yeah, it'll be okay. We might get to find we'll see how So I think that it's a difference in culture. Right? And I think we're now getting to that point. It is an opportunity, I think, that you're saying, that we're now able to get onto a more level playing field with the US and start being a bit more American, or just a bit more human, a bit more entrepreneurial in our endeavors. And on the point of China, actually, so I met with some government officials from Beijing just last year. There is a huge opportunity in China in that they are asking European outfits to come to China and actually innovate and sell there. And there are actual organizations now being set up that can take medical device products that have already gone through CE marking and whatnot, and come over to China and actually start selling in those regions, because they're trying to align in a way that is, I think, the kind of learn from the experiences of Europe and the US, I guess. and try to align so that they can take these things quickly and get a very large population, local population, to benefit from those technologies. So there's a huge opportunity there to be had.
One quick comment is, I think what we are lacking to some extent, at least in France, and I don't know about other countries in Europe, we are lacking to some extent the energy from doctors in healthcare institutions, whatever it means, to go and raise their ITs and bring them to the next level. Not necessarily being themselves an entrepreneur and creating a business, etc., but just putting it loud and clear that it's something that could change things, and people are not really well educated on that. I mean, all my colleagues in my hospital, they all have terrible ideas, and when I tell them, why don't you go and try to make it happen? And they say, wow, it's too complex, I don't have the time, whatever. So I think it's a big challenge for us.
If you can just kind of jump on this one, if all that's still let me. I think that there is one question from the, let's say, medical doctor perspective. If they have innovative ideas, I believe it's very important to create the structures, so it creates the opportunity to bring them, forward, test them, and implement them. But also one thing which is, kind of stopping people on the way is that, okay, I'm now supposed to change my workflow. Oh my God. It will be very complicated. So if we bring the innovative ideas, and there are so many which can really improve doctors' work, that's amazing. We can do faster, we can kind of simplify. But if the implementation of these ideas are taking such a long time, there are some regulatory things, there are some, like to learn or unlearn certain things. I believe that this is what often stops us. That's my perspective.
You definitely need the structure, and I think in the US, the energy that you see from the doctors and the physicians, a lot of times it's money, a lot of times it's the structure, it's the hospital, the health system focused on that. And at the end of the day, it's a business decision. Like the hospitals made the decision because it's a business decision, because they want to diversify revenue away from patient care. That's what you're seeing across the board in the US. That's what leads them to put really huge incentives in front of the doctors. They're like, you go as far as 40% royalties for the physician inventor on some of these technologies. And they're like, well, that's how I'm going to recruit people to move to the Midwest. But it's a business decision, because you see some huge health systems in the US are making more money from royalties and licenses than they are from patient care, which is a low margin business. They're basically supermarket-like.
I second that. So the NHS is a public body in England, and there's a great sort of drive from the local universities, are often attached to hospitals, to innovate and bring something out and protect some IP and build a business from it. Where a lot of the times what's happening is when you go through the regulatory process, you have to do the health economics around what your innovation is and what benefits it will bring. And oftentimes what happens is that innovation will actually increase the number of diagnoses, let's say, for a particular disease, which means there will be more strain on the NHS because they actually have to do more. So it's more about an economic decision than it is about a patient care decision.
Yeah, I also want to say that my father is a physician in France, and I also know hundreds of physicians in the US. It's really two completely different animals. The American physicians are entrepreneurs, many of them. They all want to be KOLs, they want to be on podiums, they want to publish papers, they want to be stars, they want to make money, they want to contribute to product development. There is a lot, of course, in France also, but over there, it's not difficult to find KOLs. Actually, it's hard to control the number of KOLs you can bring on each project, because everybody wants to be on it. It is interesting.
Interesting decisions. Thank you. In the previous roundtable, Roundtable, we spoke briefly about market access, and then on my side, that's one of my main topics that I'm trying to think forward. I wanted to ask this group of leaders, what's your thoughts on how things will evolve in terms of price transparency? I mean, Suzanne, you mentioned the idea of bringing more transparencies across European countries. I mean, still recently, I remember working for companies that were used to have a product sold in the UK 5 times the price of the same products in France, and for another products that could have been just the opposite. So my question is, as representative of corporations, startups, large company, I mean, we need to consider, long-term how pricing will be evolving. Do you see more transparency being potentially a risk? I mean, we've seen that within the pharmaceutical industries, where countries are looking at what are the pricing across Europe and benchmarking towards the lower price. I mean, is that a risk in medical devices as well? And in the same approach, Guillaume, I think you mentioned the price in the US being 10 times higher than in Europe, which I fully agree and support. Do you think that is sustainable over time? I mean, for the benefits of patients, I see company launching product in the US, taking the clear decision of not launching in Europe, with the fear of seeing their price in the US being reduced significantly as well. So I think these all questions to me is quite fundamental, and I wanted to hear about your thoughts. I'm Stefan Mendras, and I'm working both for startup as advisor and for large corporation as well.
Okay. So, sustainable? No. I'll give you an example. I used to sell pedicle screws in 2005 for $1,500 a screw. Now they are $1,000, $900, still €100. So it was funny because the American distributors and many people in the ecosystem were furious. It was the end of the world because the price of the pedicle screw would go from $1,500 to $1,000 when it costs $25 to make. So there is pressure on pricing for sure, especially after Obamacare came in, and then it was more value, but they're still very, very high. There are other reasons for that. I mean, we have distribution networks that are very, very expensive, and the distributors in the US make anywhere from a 15% commission to a 40% commission on every case. And they have to be in the OR for every case. So you put that into the pricing matrix. Of course, you need higher pricing. Then of course you have legal fees, you have all kind of other things. So I think that's why the system is so complicated in the US to change, because so many people are making so much money, using it, and benefiting from it. And actually, some distributors make more money than the surgeons. And all they do is sit down in the OR, crossing their fingers and waiting for the case to take place. So, I can say that to a French audience, I wouldn't say that to an American audience, but it is true. So, but the pressure on pricing is I don't know, do you agree? Is real in the US. They're going to have to do something. At least before the Trump administration, that was a big thing. We'll see if that changes. But it's crazy. It is really crazy.
Yeah, so the pressure on pricing is very, very real. I mean, I think that when you launch a product and you are getting really high reimbursement in the US, everyone kind of knows like that's going to be up at some point. Like at some point, the insurance company is going to push back, or CMS is going to push back, or the reimbursement is going to go away. I think there's an understanding of that. But in the US, it's the Wild West over there. Like we're really good at innovating so that we come up with version 2.0 so we get the premium pricing again. So it's just like rinse and repeat, make money, rinse and repeat, make money. So it's never sustainable. But the pricing goes away, there's pricing pressures, and then you come up with a new product. So I think you kind of see that over and over again. Transparency, I will need to.
All right. So the role of a notified body is it safe? Does it perform as intended? So we stay away from how much did it cost and what are you selling it for. But because there are so many national health services and social systems in Europe, there is European legislation called Health Technology, and they will look at economic viability. Is this something we should do for French people? Is it worth do you know what a quality is, a quality of life here? How much is 1 year of someone's life worth? And the economists will come to that. So yeah, are they sustainable? And Europe will look at that. As far as transparency goes, I think, Guillaume, you said that you were an OEM. So there used to be something in Europe where you could take J&J plaster and put a new brand on it and sell it at a different price. And I think some of the transparency coming for Europe will say, what is this product? Is it the same as this product? Because there was a way of, it was exactly the same product. It had a green badge and a red badge, and you sold it for different prices. I think Europe's going to take away some of that, and that transparency would then maybe stop some of those price differences. But
Kat first, and then we'll go and have lunch.
Yeah, so thanks. I actually personally was working on market access on medical devices in Europe. And it was for an oncology, actually, set of devices. I believe that one of the things which are also very important, and so I bridge to what you have mentioned, Suzanne, about the health technology assessment. HTA plays an extremely important role. And I believe that a lot of company, let's say, management is not taking this in account in the early stages when they work on the product, when they set their price, what this price will be. Eventually thinking about, let's say, the unique price of the devices, like, or whatever they want to sell. But the reality is that the way it works is, we haven't mentioned this, is the reimbursement. Is who's going to pay for it in the large amount of let's say devices, or if it's a medical kind of component, biotechnology, or anything else. And how it's going to be negotiated with the healthcare insurance, with the Ministry of Health. Who is going to really see the values? Because health economics is definitely a kind of missing point in our discussion, which has to be taken care of. And one, I believe, of the differences entering into different markets is that, based on the number of patients who would need the device, for example, or based on what is, the GDP of the country, there will be some slight differences. So there is a lot of transparency, but I believe that there is, like a kind of willingness from the European point of view to make it a little bit more equal or even, but there will be still certain differences depending on, how big is the market, how, all these things are going to be